Goma, a city caught between hope and devastation, lies on the front line of one of Africa's most volatile conflicts. In recent years, the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has been a flashpoint for violence, with the M23 rebel group and other armed factions wreaking havoc on civilians. As the war rages on, the region's neighbors and regional organizations scramble for a solution. Today, a new chapter in the crisis is unfolding, and the spotlight is on the East Africa Community, an alliance of nations formed to foster cooperation and stability in the region.
The escalating conflict and deteriorating situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are a grave concern to the people and governments of East Africa. Noting the worsening humanitarian crisis exacerbated by ongoing military actions, including the closure of airspace in Goma, I call for the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities.
The East Africa community was supposed to take a decisive step in tackling the escalating violence in the DRC, led by Kenyan President William Ruto. A virtual summit was called to discuss the situation in the country's eastern provinces, particularly in Goma, where thousands have been displaced by the ongoing conflict. But something was missing. One leader was notably absent. President Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo, despite being at the heart of the crisis, chose not to attend. His absence raised eyebrows, and in a region where diplomatic cooperation is vital, it left many asking where's the commitment to peace. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame was quick to respond. He expressed his concern over Tshikedi's non-participation, calling it a sign of disunity within the East African community. Kagame highlighted that without the DRC's leadership at the table, the summit's discussion on peace seemed futile.
Even now, the person or the country we are talking about is not represented as we are discussing. And it is supposed to be, the country is supposed to be part of East Africa, but nowhere to be represented. So I'm not sure what bearing what we are discussing has on what happens in the process of finding a solution in this country.
Despite Felix Tshikedi's absence, the summit went on, with 4 other heads of state in attendance: President William Ruto of Kenya, Evariste of Burundi, Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, and Tanzania's Samia Suluhu. During the summit, President Kagame's concerns were echoed by the leaders present, who discussed the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the eastern DRC. The violence in Goma and surrounding areas has displaced over 500,000 people, many of whom seek refuge across borders. Armed groups, including M23, continue to control swaths of territory in the east, creating a humanitarian nightmare, with the DRC government seemingly disengaged, and the East Africa community has found itself navigating a complex political landscape.
I emphasize the obligation of all parties to facilitate humanitarian access to affected populations and urge both sides to pursue peaceful means to resolving this tragic conflict.
Instead of focusing on the East Africa Summit, Tshikedi participated in a meeting organized by the Southern African Development Community, discussing the very same security issues. This decision raised doubt about the DRC's commitment to the East Africa community, as the country now appears to be splitting its attention between regional bodies.
He didn't want East African community because they were not doing things the way he wanted, even if it was not right. He got rid of them and he decided to bring in SADC without any question, coming to assist Tshisekedi to fight alongside FDLR, these murderers of our people here in this country.
This growing division between the regional organizations has placed the peace process in jeopardy. The EAC leaders, aware that SADC is also involved in effort to resolve this crisis, have now called for a joint EAC-SADC meeting to align their strategies moving forward. But can these two organizations work together effectively without the full participation of all parties? The absence of President Tshisekedi sends a clear message to the region. It tells us that the DRC is not fully invested in the collective peace-building efforts of the EAC. The peace process requires the active participation of all key stakeholders, including the government of the DRC. Without it, the likelihood of finding a lasting solutions becomes much smaller.
President, I asked last time in our meeting, the last summit, where is East African community, or does it exist? And exist for what? By the way, even now the person or the country we are talking about is not represented as we are discussing. It is supposed to be, the country is supposed to be part of East Africa, but nowhere to be represented. So I'm not sure what bearing what we are discussing has on what happens in the process of finding a solution in this country.
In the wake of these concerns, the East Africa community leaders have pledged to intensify their diplomatic efforts. They are urging the DRC government to engage directly with the stakeholders behind the war, including the M23 rebel group and other armed factions. For the people of Goma and the millions displaced across the region, the stakes could not be higher. While their fate depends on political negotiations, they continue to live in uncertainty, hoping that diplomatic efforts can bring an end to the violence.
Ninamwambia kama kuko makubaliano yenye alipatanaka na Kabila na Kagame, waongee mzuri, wapatane, wamalizane, sisi tunakufa kwenye hatuyue, tunataka amani.
Can these leaders overcome their differences and unite for peace, or will their divisions further deepen the crisis? Only time will tell. For now, the region remains in a fragile state, caught in a cycle of conflict, diplomacy, and uncertainty. In the heart of Africa, the fate of Goma and the larger East African region hangs in the balance. The hope for peace is still alive, but it depends on whether the leaders can come together, not just in words, but in action. This is the story of Goma, a city torn between conflict and hope, and a region struggling to find unity amidst crisis. Felix Wandera for News Time.